Yes. Okay. Micah chapter number 3. The third chapter of Micah. It's the second part of Micah. It's broken down into 3 sections, and Micah chapter 3 is the beginning of the second section. And I think an easier one to follow. So even if you haven't read it in advance tonight, you probably see where he's going with it fairly quickly and readily here. Micah chapter number 3, follow along as I read through it. Verse number 1 says, "And I said, Hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and ye princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment, who hate the good and love the evil? Who pluck off their skin from off them and their flesh from off their bones, who also eat the flesh of my people and flay their skin from off them, and they break their bones and chop them in pieces as for the pot and as flesh within the cauldron? Then shall they cry unto the Lord, but he will not hear them. He will even hide his face from them at that time, as they have behaved themselves ill in their doings. Thus saith the Lord concerning the prophets that make my people err, that bite with their teeth and cry, Peace! And he that putteth not into their mouths, even they even prepare war against him. Therefore night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have a vision, and it shall be dark unto you, that ye shall not divine, and the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them. Then shall the seers be ashamed, and the diviners confounded. Yea, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer of God. But truly I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment of might, to declare unto Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. Hear this, I pray you, ye heads of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. They build up Zion with blood, and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountains of the house as the high places of the forest." A little bit easier. I think it's an easier one tonight than the preceding chapters. So the preceding chapters, when he was talking, chapter number 1, remember, is them breaking the first tablet of their responsibility before God, of the table of the 10 Commandments. Second chapter is they're breaking it, which contains man's responsibility to his fellow man, and so they're breaking both of the tables of the 10 Commandments in their sins. And now he's shifted that focus away from the people, and he's zeroing in now on the leadership. Thoughts, feedback, observations out of this chapter. Deep wisdom that you can give to us tonight. Jeff doesn't sound very hopeful. Cole.
There's actually a greater responsibility upon the leaders that, like, okay, fair enough, some of the people don't actually know what's right and what's wrong, and they don't know the law, they don't know, like, what's right before God, but the position that you're in, like, it is your responsibility. You are the one who's meant to be teaching them, you're the one who's meant to be guiding them, you're the one who's meant to be upholding righteous judgment.
Upholding is the key there.
Yeah, and God actually judges leaders more, I don't know what the word is, like, more intensely or whatever.
To whom much is given, much is required.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think he's angry with the people, but he's somewhat more angry with the leaders because, they're not actually running out and teaching people the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, it says that with the prophets, they make my people err.
Yeah. Verse 12 as well. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field. Which is really interesting considering what he's talking about. He's talking about, man, this is going to be like the most horrible thing that ever happened to this city. It's going to be destroyed, it's going to be plowed up, but it's for your sake, like, it's for your benefit, like, that in me destroying this city, ultimately you're gonna be sorrowful for your sin and you're gonna turn back eventually. That's what I see it as.
Yeah. Well, chapter 4 is the millennium. But we're not there yet. That's next week. Yeah, like chapter 4, we'll just skip ahead, do you think? Yeah. Chapter 4 is fantastic. I think it's one of the strongest commentaries on what the millennial reign of Christ will look like. There. Ben. Yeah. Anybody else? Connor.
And then it reminds me of where there is no vision for the church. And it's actually like a spiritual thing that God puts a block in such that there's no more focus on
Yeah. 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 And it's interesting that you place that verse where there is no vision, the people perish with this, because that's a lot closer linked to the truth than how most people use that verse. Most people say, if you're what are you going to do in 5 years' time and 10 years' time? What's your vision? Where are you going? What's your plan? If there is no vision, the people perish. If you've got no direction, you're all going to perish. And people wander around without a clear vision. But that's not what he's saying. The vision is the word of God. It's a vision from the prophet from God through the prophets is their vision. And where there is no prophet, where there is no vision, where there is no word of God, the people perish. And he's saying there's going to be no vision. There's going to be darkness. You're not going to be given these visions from God. And people perish under such conditions. Nowadays, I see anyone in politics, Micah hunting, but you're actually striking it up. Yeah. Yep. That fits in with verse 3 and 4, or verses 2 and 3, where it talks about they're plucking off their skin from off them, their flesh from off their bones. Eat the flesh of my people, flay their skin, and break their bones and chop them up into pieces and put them in the pot. It's like, what on earth is going on there? What's he talking about? But he's saying that the leaders are basically just consuming the people. They're just using them for their own sustenance in a graphic way, is what he's saying. And then they bite with their teeth. The same idea that you're consuming after them. I think that same. You're eating them. You look at this where it says, and they shall cry unto the Lord, but they will not hear them. For he will even hide his face from them at that time, as they behave themselves ill in their doings. So he says, when the leaders cry out to God, when the trouble comes, he says God ain't going to listen to them in their time of need, because they have been cruel and they have not been unjust to the people. And there's many verses that back up that idea that God will not hear. Where is it? Verse 5. They bite with their teeth and cry peace, and he that putteth not into their mouths, they even prepare war against him. So if you're not paying them, if they're not getting out of you what they want, then they prophesy war against you. And bad things are going to come on you. And God's against you and war's going to come. But if you put into their mouths and you feed the prophets, then you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Oh, I've got a word from God. It's good. You're going to go travel the world for his name, which seems to be like the most popular prophecy in Pentecostalism. I would like to have a poll of every single person who has ever been given that prophecy. And it's like someone randomly comes up to them and says, "Oh, God showed me you're going to do great things in his name and you're going to travel the world for his name." It's honestly all the time. But anyway, the point is that they were saying, right, you put into my mouth, you feed me, and you'll get kickbacks from God through me. Isn't that just sickening? But that's the idea. See if you can get the connection here. Remember chapter number 2, what was one of the main things that they were talking about in chapter number 2? What was the main sin, grievance out of chapter number 2? Yeah, it's it. Taking stuff. Covetousness, really. And then you get to chapter number 3, and guess what the leaders are all into? Covetousness. They want stuff. They want the kickbacks. They're consuming the people for their own greed. And then it says here in verse number 11, when it gets down to the heads of the judge, they judge for reward. So they're not even judging for the sake of righteousness. They're judging for money. If you give me money, I will judge favorably in your condition. Which means this. It means those who are wealthy are going to get more favorable treatment than the poor. And if you read through, God often is condemning them for how they treat the poor. Because how you treat the poor reveals your heart towards God. Because they were abusing them and using them for their own greedy gain and being favorable to the rich for the kickbacks. So the heads thereof judge for reward, the priests thereof teach for hire. We'll go somewhere and we'll do it, but my fee for lecturing, my fee for teaching is this, and this. And they wouldn't do it. Everything had to be for money. The prophets thereof divine for money. Yes, I'll have a word from God, and yes, I can go see what God has a word for you, but I tell you what, my fee again is, I pay this much per hour, or it's this. Everything had a price tag attached to it. When we get to Malachi, was it on Sunday that we were dealing with this a little bit? Malachi, or was it last week? I can't remember. But the verse in Malachi says they wouldn't even shut the doors for naught. They wouldn't even close the house of God. Can we get someone to lock up? Actually, the guy who locks up gets paid. Can I get someone to unlock around here? Can you get someone to unlock? Oh, yeah, but, can I get a weekly fee for unlocking the house of God and turning on the air conditioners? That's the sort of idea of what they were saying. Everything had a money attachment to it because they wanted the money, and the covetousness ran through everything. They were wealthy people back then as well. Both Israel and Judah. Hezekiah was the king during these days, during the time of Micah and during the time of Isaiah. And if you read about them, Isaiah deals with the wealthy as well. There's a lot about the rich, and they're going around in great flowing garments and how they walk and prance around and in the wealth and displaying their wealth. That's Isaiah talks about that. And here is Micah dealing with the same issue about their wealth and how the wealth has turned their heart and corrupted their heart towards God and towards each other. And if you read about Hezekiah, he was greatly blessed, and God blessed him. In fact, he showed, was it Hezekiah that showed all the riches that were in the temple to Babylon? Is that Hezekiah? And Hezekiah deals with, is it Hezekiah as well that comes up with the plan about how to deal with all the money that kept coming in? So there was money pouring in. And you notice here that he doesn't actually say anything bad about the king, because the king actually seemed to be good. So the king was good, but he had lousy princes underneath him and around him. And the princes were all looking for the kickback. So it was a wealthy time. And if you read the life of Hezekiah, you realize the wealth that was there and the blessings of God that were there through Hezekiah. And God was blessing them because of Hezekiah as a good godly king. But the people were still corrupt. The people were still. Yeah. So there was money. And no doubt when the money had been distributed as well, they're like, well, you got to do it for this, and you got to make sure it comes towards me. So as much as Hezekiah was in the right, trying to do the right thing, and money was flowing through, and they all wanted to get it into their pockets as well. So there was good times, but in the good times it revealed the bad hearts amongst them as well. But covetousness is what Micah is saying. Verse number 8, we can't finish this chapter without having a look at verse number 8, because Micah talks about himself here, and in light of the false prophets, and he says, but truly, I am full of the power of the Spirit of God and of judgment and of might to declare unto Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin. He says, I don't care about all the other false prophets that are all wanting for the kickbacks. He says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to declare what God actually is saying to this people. And he was serious about these things. And that's why we have a book in the Bible called Micah and not one of the false prophets. I don't know who one of the false prophets are. No doubt they wrote a book because all false prophets like to write a book. But that book doesn't end up in the Bible. It's Micah's prophecy that ends up in the Bible. And it's our message for today still holds true, because this is the man that said, I'm full of power, not of my own power and not of my own ability, but I tell you what, the Spirit of God is on me, and the Spirit of God has given me this boldness, and I'm going to declare right judgment, and I'm going to declare, thus saith the Lord. It would have been an interesting character, and I'm challenged by these as well. Some of these men that are they're just outgoing. It's so far out of my personality. But you look at these, and he is going to the kings, and he's going to the rulers, and not the king, but he's going to the rulers, and he's pointing the finger at the princes, and he's saying, "You are wrong against God. God is against what you're doing." And there's boldness there. And he says, where does boldness come from? Daniel and I were talking about this briefly the other day, but boldness, where does boldness come from? Righteousness, the righteous are as bold as a lion. Yeah, righteousness brings boldness. And personality, there is a natural boldness through personality. Paul was naturally bold. He'd just go in amongst people, hold up his hands, right, listen to me, I've got something to say. And it goes into the synagogues. That's a boldness. But at the same time, Paul was also praying that the Spirit of God, he says, pray for me, that we may have boldness to preach the gospel. I think, Paul, do you really need boldness? It sounds like you've already got it in ample supply. But he said, man, Paul says, I need it. Jeremiah said, God tells Jeremiah, don't be afraid of their faces. Go and preach. Go and say what I've said, and I'll be with you. So this idea of boldness is required, but Micah is saying whatever his personality was, he still says it's the Spirit of God, that's the Holy Spirit that gives the boldness to stand up with right judgment and right power, to declare unto Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin. And it's that boldness that makes a difference. Like in the city or here, it's actually looking someone in the eyes and challenging them about their position before God. To tell them the truth. It takes a boldness to do that, and it makes a difference. And Micah had that boldness, but he says, you know what, I'm full of the power of the Spirit of the Lord. And I think if we just get filled with the Spirit of God, we might actually just separate ourselves naturally from the false prophets around us if we actually do walk in the Spirit of God, instead of saying, I'm filled with the Spirit, but they do walk in lies. That's what you said in chapter number 2. It says they do spread lies and say that they are filled with the Spirit, and they prophesy falsehood. Chapter 2, verse 11. Everyone was claiming the Spirit of God. That's the point. The false prophets and Micah, they were all saying, filled with the Spirit, we're of the Spirit of God, but some were prophesying lie, and Micah said, I have power, and because I really am filled, and I have justice, and I'm preaching out sin, because this really is the Spirit of God, not like the kickbacks over here that are looking at it for money. Nothing changes, does it? That's one thing. As you go through the minor prophets, you just realize, I almost said as you go through the false prophets, but as you go through the minor prophets, you just find out, man, I'm pretty sure this is 2023. This is written, because it's just the same, year after year, generation after generation. Particularly when money comes into the picture. Same things, the same fruit starts to show itself. Money's not bad. Plenty of very rich people in the Bible, but you have to be very careful with money because it'll take away the heart, and covetousness is idolatry. It is idolatry. Find a prayer partner or two tonight and go to the Lord in prayer.